For those of you familiar with the format, please feel free to ask any questions that you might have there. You can also post your questions in the chat window. I do ask that you remain on mute there, just to avoid talking over one another there, but I will stop periodically throughout the session and ask for questions if anybody wants to clear anything up. So today's webinar is on our advanced concepts and custom rules there. So we'll be going through a few things like custom rules, importing users from Active Directory and the associated settings there, as well as some of the database communicator advanced concepts. And at the end, we're going to finish up with some troubleshooting items and logging type stuff there. So at the end, I will also open up the session if there's any additional topics that anybody wants to discuss during the session here. With that in mind, let's get started with the rules functionality. So within the Print Audit 6 Administrator here, from the left-hand pane, if I click on Advanced, we do have our Custom Rules section. Click on that there. And right now, I don't have any custom rules currently configured. So I'm just going to either click on the New button in the top left here or double-click on a blank line. And we're going to get the little rule wizard available. So first and foremost, the rule name is going to be very important. This rule name needs to reflect what the rule is intended for. And the reason that I really do stress the rule name is when you do have to make modifications to that rule or come in and determine what's going on in an environment, it's much easier to do if the rules are correctly named. So I will call this the soft duplex rule. The next drop down here is run this rule. Right now you only have the option of first, but this allows you to change the hierarchy of rules. So I would be able to initially run a soft duplex rule. After that, I can execute something like a page rule or a color restriction rule. So you can change the order those rules execute. That hierarchy may establish certain rules that execute for users, and we can also stop processing a rule if the conditions are met. So if I encounter the soft duplex rule, don't bother going through the color rule or anything like that. I do see a question. I could make you the presenter there, however, I would then not be able to present. Can everybody see the screen? Is that the issue there? Can't see the screen. Is everybody able? Oh, anybody able to see the screen? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Sorry about that.
I can see it fine.
All right. So back to the rule. We had discussed the rule name here, the rule dropdown, which currently only allows us to run this rule first. It's our first rule. And then there's the stop processing rule option that I mentioned there. The next thing about rules that we have, there are two main components here. There are conditions and there are actions. So rules take on the form of a logical statement. If these conditions are met, then we're going to apply these actions. Now, the conditions that we have are fairly varied here. We have things like the application name. So if you're printing from Outlook, take these actions. We have other interesting ones like the driver color mode or the document title. We even have conditions around the day of the week or the time of the day. So if you want to establish some rules around printing at noon, for example, you can actually restrict printing during the lunch hour there. The day of the week rule is sometimes used if a organization does not have weekend hours. So if staff are not going to be in the office just to prevent any printing from occurring, we can establish a day of the week rule. So if it's Saturday or Sunday, disallow printing. You can stack these conditions as well. So we can say if the application name is Outlook and the document title contains confidential, we can disallow the printing or we can notify HR. So you can vary these conditions as well. There is also the triggering option, so when all of the following conditions are met or when any of the conditions are met. So if we see duplex or color or total pages, trigger a rule, or we can have it duplex and color and number of pages. So it's a logical statement there. One other rule condition to mention, just for the advanced concepts here, is the job satisfies rule. So you can have one rule that counts color, counts duplex, and counts total number of pages. If the job satisfies that rule and the document title is confidential, then send a notification to HR. So rules can be quite complex in their structure. Typically, when you go into a customer environment there, the rules are going to be fairly simplistic to start out, and then over time, those rules may develop into something a little more complex. So our most popular ones are typically around color mode, application name, and document title, which we'll be covering a little today here. The actions section here has a number of things that we can do as a result of encountering those conditions. So we can ask for specific custom fields. If they're printing to the marketing printer, ask them for the paper type, whether it's semi-gloss, photo, mylar, so on and so forth. The three most utilized actions here are display a message and cancel the job, which is what's called a hard rule there. The user gets a message that the job is canceled. They do not have any option to continue. So their print job is then canceled. They have to resubmit after adjusting or printing to the correct device, depending on what the conditions stated there. Next one down here, display a message and continue the job. This is an informational message. So just so you know, Bob, this job is going to cost X amount of dollars there. We're allowing you to continue, but this is a notification message. You could put a green initiative type message in there as well. Please consider in the future not printing emails from Outlook, but we'll allow you to print that email. Next option down here, display a message and present the option to cancel the job. This gives the user the opportunity to curb their print behavior. So they're able to continue the job if they absolutely need to, but they're going to get notified of this message every time, and hopefully it will eventually curb the user's behavior. They'll realize that, yes, I should be printing this to the higher volume, lower cost MFP device rather than my local HP LaserJet. A few other options here. As I mentioned, if we see confidential in the document title, we can send an email message to HR to notify. Another good example there is resume in the title. If somebody's printing off a resume, notify HR. So you have some flexibility there. This send an email message does require the SMTP server settings to be configured, so that is a prerequisite for that action there. All right. So for the soft duplex rule, I'm just going to add application job duplex setting is true. So if we do see, job duplex setting is false. If the job is not duplexed, we can display a message and cancel the job. And if I could spell today. be sure to make these messages meaningful to the user so they understand why they're receiving a message. There is also the option, if I hit the F1 key here, to input message variables into our messages. So instead of hello user, I can use the %user variable to actually populate the name of the user. So you're calling Bob out by name. Hello Bob, we have canceled your job, please print in duplex. Very personalized message there. Some other useful variables here, the total cost, the total number of pages, the user balance as well. You can display how much balance the user has left if you're using the allowances and declining balance feature there. We can even pull the title of the document. So, hey Bob, you really shouldn't be printing out confidential documents of this variety. And that is the soft duplex rule. You'll note that the rule is enabled here, and we're not stopping the processing of rules if we encounter this rule. When I create my second rule here, you can have it execute after the soft duplex rule or first in the order, and the rules will reflect the order that they're being applied in, so one at the top and so on. So that's how you can accomplish that tiering there. For a color rule, we can either use the driver color mode or we can use the total number of color units. I always recommend using the total color units, and the reason for that is universal drivers are often defaulted to color, even for mono units or black and white units. So using the total number of color units, the color jobs that we detect may be more reliable than the driver color mode setting. So. We can have the total color units equaling. So if it is 5, then execute. Note that if it's 6 pages, we're not going to encounter the rule. If it's 4 pages, we're not going to encounter the rule. If it's greater than 0, for example, or if it's greater than 5, if it's at least 5 or less than 5, at most is between, is not between. So you do have a lot of flexibility in when this qualifier takes place. So, any questions on rules at this point? Are there any rules that anybody would like to see up on screen here? Okay. So we'll continue on. The next section I'd like to talk about here, just briefly, is the network and authentication. Now, mine is currently set to Windows peer-to-peer. For this next section on importing users from Active Directory, we will have to make sure that the network type is set to Active Directory. What I will show you is if we're set to Windows peer-to-peer, and I go over to the Users section here, when I click on Import, I do still have a domain option, so we can import from the domain, but it'll be limited in the advanced functionality that we have access to. So we can't do things like populate PIN codes, for example. We can generate PIN codes if we want, but we can't pull them in from an Active Directory attribute, which is really the power of using that Active Directory network type. So what I will do now is I will change that network type from Windows peer-to-peer, which is the default, to Active Directory. Just make sure we save that. This time when I'm in the users list here, you'll note that I've got a new user populated as well. So it is important to have that network authentication type set when you do the initial installation so that you don't duplicate users within that list, just keeps it clean. When I click on Import, I now have the option to limit to OU, and from the pins drop-down, I can also assign from a directory attribute. So that is very powerful if they already have an attribute populated with a number that they know. In education, for example, it's often present that the student ID will be within an Active Directory attribute. So we can use that as their identifier when they're using PIN code authentication. K-12 schools, especially elementary level students, they'll often have a generic student account for lab computers. It is difficult to determine which user is printing those documents if everybody is using the same generic account. Therefore, we can set the authentication type to PIN code, and we can identify the user based on the information they provide at the authentication prompt. So it is very helpful for setting this up to assign from Active Directory because you don't have to wait till the user populates in the system, manually generate a PIN code for them, and then provide that information to the student. It's already typically a piece of information that the user is familiar with. If I select Assign from Directory attribute, I can go All Users, and I can select the attribute name like Pager, for example. Not typically something that's leveraged too often anymore, but it is a field that can be populated and leveraged for both the copy, scan, the walk-up operations of the device, and any secure operations if we're leveraging an embedded product. Now, for the domain, I'm just going to enter print audit is my domain. And the next section down here is limiting to an OU. Now, this is in dot notation from the lowest level to the highest level, and this will likely require a customer's IT input. They're familiar with the directory structure that they have in place, and if they're looking to limit the import to a specific OU, it's probably information that they already have available to you. So it is good to involve the customer's IT when you're doing these directory imports, just to make sure they turn out as expected. So my example here, I have an OU head office, an accounting OU under that head office, and then a users OU under the accounting. So I would just enter that users.accounting.head office. And that'll import users just from that users OU that exists under accounting in the head office. So anything outside of that OU will not be imported for users. The next two items here are pretty standard. This is the tracking profile. I currently only have track available, and the security profile. We'll assign them all to regular users there. Now, the next one here is very important when you're doing Active Directory imports on a scheduled basis. And the reason for that is if we reassign profiles for security, for example, everybody who gets imported is going to be a regular user. This includes my administrator account and will lock me out from accessing the tools. So be very careful with the reassigned profiles. I always recommend leaving that at no. So don't reassign the profiles if the users exist in the system, unless you're specifically limiting to an OU like we have here. So if you know that all users under the accounting OU in the head office there are going to be regular users, you can reassign the profiles, and any changes will be applied to the users list there. Should not affect your administrator unless they're a part of that OU as well. All right. The other functionality that the Active Directory network type will have for you when you're importing users from AD like we are currently is under the grouping tab here. We can also group by OU attribute, OU name, OU range. So that's very, very powerful, especially in education. So you can actually group users by the OU range, and if the customer's Active Directory structure supports it, then you can group users by grade or by school, and you can use that to run reports. So great functionality there. If I select OU range, it's just going to ask me what levels. So in my example here, head office is the top level there, and if I just wanted to import this, I would go level 3 to 3. We would group by this level here. If I were to wipe out the users and there were several options under the accounting in terms of the structure there. Those would be grouped by whatever OU they happen to be with after accounting, so level 3. And again, you can assign new users only, or you can assign all users. Typically with grouping, I do recommend assigning all users, simply because if there is a membership change for a user, that is reflected within the system there. When you generate reports, that user is now a member of the new group. And last but certainly not least on the Active Directory import is the ability to schedule these imports. The frequency that the schedule is going to trigger really does depend on the environment that you're working with. For education, typically, monthly is probably going to be more than enough. There's not a lot of turnover month to month in an education institution in terms of Active Directory typically. But if you did find that you needed to increase the frequency, you can do a daily import, a weekly import if you want. Now, because this is a Windows scheduled task, we can also trigger that at any frequency interval just by modifying the scheduled task within the task scheduler. So that is an option to you as well. My caution with the scheduling here is because the Active Directory import could be quite a large import, I do recommend running this after hours. So when the users are not accessing the system would be a best practice there. So it's probably safe that at midnight we do the Active Directory import. If it takes 3 hours and finishes up at 3 a.m., the users really aren't going to notice. They come in at 7 a.m. the next morning, group membership has been updated, and the performance of the network, performance of the domain controller should not be affected there. If you were to run this, at noon, there are users that are going to be working over noon. They may experience slowdowns in the environment, so best practice, do it in the off hours so that you're not affecting that user. Any questions on the Active Directory import, assigning attributes, limiting to OUs, assigning profiles, grouping, or scheduling? Okay, great. The next item that I would like to take a look at here is some of the database communicator options that we have. So I'm just going to launch the communicator configuration app and drag that over here. This is what the database communicator GUI looks like. So this is actually a window into the service. It allows you to stop and start the service. A few other items here. It allows you to change the logging level, the port that the communicator is listening on, as well as the max threads. Now, the threads are interesting. They are the number of communications that can be handled at any given time. So 10 threads can handle X number of communications. Typically, 10 is going to be all right for a smaller environment, but as you get into those larger environments, we may have to increase the max threads. So what we recommend is 10 threads for every 1,000 workstations to a maximum of 30 threads. Now, this number is not set in stone. It is a little flexible depending on the customer's hardware. So depending on how powerful that server is, you may be able to increase the number of threads if the processors can handle it. But typically, if you're installing this on a Windows 95 system, we really would not recommend going over 30 threads. So do consider the hardware that the application is running on, but general rule of thumb, 10 threads for every 1,000 workstations. Just going to stop the service here. We're going to bump that up to 30 threads, and I'm going to go into the logging level. Logging level none is the default, so we're not worrying about any of those communication messages about the clients connecting back to the server. Generally, you want to leave that at none so that those log files aren't filling up the customer's hard drive there. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3, these are troubleshooting log levels. Whenever you're troubleshooting an issue, when you're working with our support team there, Level 3 is generally going to be where we go so that we get the most detail about the error. This logs client connections, job information that flows across the network there. So good to have it at level 3. And you do have to stop that service again to increase the log level. Now I can start it there. Great. If you don't get any error messages, the communicator has successfully connected to SQL. Don't get any licensing messages. We're all good to go. Now, under the Tools menu, a couple things I'd like to point out to you here. We have these 2 options listed. Now, for those of you that have played in the healthcare vertical there, you may have run into HIPAA or other compliance standards that these organizations need to meet. Now, HIPAA compliance has to do with display of patient information. I'm not too versed on the particulars of it, but often we will have to disable the document tracking. Reason for that is often these documents may have patient record information within the document title. Let's say a healthcare number, some personally identifiable piece of information. So in order to meet those standards within the environment, for them to keep their compliance, we do have to remove the document tracking. So we can just tick that off. Within the system, you don't get that document tracking information. You can't trigger rules around document title there. So that's something to keep in mind. The track user option, that is very similar. It's just how we record jobs within the system. So we don't have to track which user is actually performing the print. We can just have a generic list of print jobs within the environment. It doesn't do much for you in terms of accountability, and reporting also suffers because you can't determine which users are printing that. So that's something to keep in mind there. The next option down here, test email notification, that is just how we can verify the SMTP server settings. So currently I don't have any settings configured. If I click on that, email test failed, wasn't able to send out that message. Something that we have recently added as well is the performance counters. Now mine will be pretty pitiful at this point. This is a fairly new install. It just gives you an indication of what's going on with the environment. So max saves per second, minimum saves per second, requests served, so on and so forth. It tells you how busy the communicator is. So these performance counters are on a per communicator basis. If you are working with a larger environment, you have multiple database communicators in the environment, the performance counters are going to be on an individual communicator basis. So just keep that in mind. Same goes for the tracking of document and tracking of user information. So be aware of that. Any questions on the database communicator at this point? Okay, great. So the last section I have on the agenda today is troubleshooting. So things like taking a look at the logs. So we'll start with some of the common Print Audit 6 issues, and then we'll go into a little more detail on log locations using the log viewer and gathering materials for support submission if necessary. So a common Print Audit 6 issue, the most common in fact, is the message that states it cannot connect and verify your information. Your print job has been canceled. What that is an indication of is that the client is not able to communicate back to the server. Now that should be very apparent within the log files. The Print Audit 6 client will log errors by default. And I'll just bring over the log viewer here, if I can. There we go. Right now I do have full logging enabled, so I also see the debug logs here. But under the client errors, I have a number of messages. Could not connect to the data server, blank on blank at 17,520. So I had blank configuration in there just to generate a few of these errors to show you. and we're getting a 160 error. Sorry. This error indicates a timeout. So when we're trying to talk to this server here on that particular address at port 17520, we're getting a timeout. We're not reaching that communicator. That could be indicative of a few things. Perhaps the data server is wrong. If I have the wrong location in there, I'm trying to talk to a system that doesn't have the database communicator. That would be one cause of the problem. On the server end, if the database communicator is stopped, we cannot communicate with it. That would be another cause of the problem. If there is a firewall or some other factor on the network that is blocking that communication, like a block on port 17520 over a VPN connection, for example, there's another cause of the problem. So that port communication does have to flow across to the server for the client to get its initial connection there and for it to not display that particular message. Now, there is a case where you may see these timeout errors present and the client is not displaying a cannot connect and verify your information. Once the client gets its initial connection to the system, it's going to take into account the disconnected jobs option. So up here at system settings, just show you, client settings, there is the disconnected jobs. We're going to track those normally by default. If we were setting to disallow or ignore jobs, it'd be a little different. But if that client has got that disconnected job setting, it knows how to handle the situation where the client cannot communicate to the server. It's just going to store those jobs locally until communication is reestablished. So it's very quiet about it. But in the log viewer, you will still see the could not connect to the data server message, the 100, or this particular error message there. So something to keep in mind. Now, you may notice at the bottom here, we do have the log locations present. When you are submitting to support, you do have to go to this location, grab that log file, zip it up, and then send it to support. It is very important to zip those files so that nothing gets changed when it gets sent over there. It also decreases the size of the message. So if you are ever looking for a log location, just take a look at the bottom there. It's a little different depending on the version of Windows, so something to keep in mind. The debug errors debug logs that I have available here are a symptom of enabling the logging. So let's go to print.6 and in the client folder here. Now I've created this PA6 log debug.txt. It is a .txt, a text file extension on a directory. That is very important. If you create a text file in here, the logging will not be enabled. If you create a directory without the .txt, the logging will not be enabled. The other thing, after you create this directory, you do have to reboot the client in order for the logging to take effect. So those debug logs will not show up until a reboot. Very important there. Any questions on enabling enhanced logging? Okay. Back to the error message that we saw where the timeout is occurring here. This little utility, pa6ccutl.exe, it's actually a window into the location and port setting for the system. So this is a registry value that's stored. Rather than going in and messing with the registry there, we've got a little GUI that you can use to update the location and port information. If the database communicator is listening on port 17520, leave this alone. That is the port it's trying to communicate with, and that's correct. So don't update that. If they have changed it to 17525, update this value so that it can communicate. Otherwise, it won't be able to reach that communicator. The location setting, if it is the host name and you're unable to connect, try pinging the host name from command line and making sure that resolves. So if the customer's DNS, domain name services, is not properly resolving the hostname, that could be a cause of a communication issue between the client and the server. Sometimes what will happen in that case is instead you'll put in the IP address of the system there so that the client has nothing to resolve on that communication request. Just reaches out on the IP and the port. Some common mistakes here are doing things like that. //. So that is a network share. We do not need a network share. This is simply a TCP connection to the server. So it only accepts IP or host name information there. Another one I've seen often is trying to connect directly to the database. We are not connecting to the database with the client, we're connecting to the database communicator. So that is the funnel component that handles all of the communications between the client and the server, between the client and SQL, for example. So, all right. I'm going to leave that there. If you do make a change to the location and port, it's going to tell you that you need to restart for the changes to take effect. That's simply because the client starts at system start, gets its configuration at that point. So failure to do that reboot could result in more of those timeout errors occurring. So after you make any location setting changes, make sure that you reboot. Okay, some other troubleshooting steps that I've got for you here. If the client is not producing a pop-up, verify that the client is installed. I know it sounds silly, but sometimes if you're using group policy for deployment, for whatever reason the client install fails, if the client is not installed on the system, we're not going to get pop-up functionality, we're not going to get any tracking, so that client is required there. If the client is installed, verify the appropriate profiles are assigned to the user and printer. So if the user is set to a profile that says track with no pop-up, you are getting the behavior that you've configured for the system there. So that is expected behavior. If the printer is set to track with no pop-up and the user is set to track with pop-up, you're not going to get a pop-up on that particular device. Any other device should produce a pop-up that's assigned to an appropriate profile. So make sure the profiles of the user and the printer that you're printing to are correctly configured there. Another one for the no pop-up is licensing. So if there is a license issue, the client may not produce a pop-up. So make sure that the license is active just by launching the administrator. It'll do a quick license check for you there. Make sure that the database communicator is started, and also make sure that the client is the same version as the server. It doesn't come up as often anymore, but on occasion, if a client is an older version, it may not be able to connect to that database communicator. So something to keep in mind. And always, 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 you do have the option of checking the logs. So the errors log should give you a good indication. Like here, we have a timeout. Further analysis may require the debug or the WinTrack logs to be created. So just creating that pa6 debug.txt directory and rebooting the client. And then you can go ahead and zip those and pass them to support if you can't determine from the log entries what the issue might be there. So Log Viewer, very helpful tool in determining what's going on in the environment there. Other issues that you might encounter, things like application tracking, for example, or strange behavior with pop-ups. If you're getting 2 pop-ups, potentially, those are things that have come up in the past. Generally, enabling the full logging and passing that along to our support team should reveal a little bit more about the issue that we're looking into there. For application tracking, it is possible that under the administrator in advanced and applications, that we actually have that particular application set to do not track or track with no pop-up. So you can control the pop-up behavior for a specific application. So sometimes that does become the problem. Other strange behaviors with applications, especially legacy applications, things that are still hanging around from from legacy systems, we may just have to set to do not track. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but if there was a system that really doesn't do any printing, an accounting system, for example, we might add that to a do not track profile so that we don't see pop-ups out of that system. We don't see tracking out of that system. All right. A few things to go over with log locations. There's two main locations. So within the user's profile in this app data directory, and also the communicator, which is in the C program data. So those are the two main locations on modern operating systems. So Windows 7, Windows 10, Server 2012, Server 2016, I believe Server 2008 as well. So the log locations should be pretty consistent there. When you start going back into Windows XP, for example, that log location changes a bit. I believe Vista is similar to Windows 7 if you ever run into that one. But when in doubt, launch up the log viewer and take a look at the location that's being displayed. It'll actually show you where that log is being loaded from. All right, any questions on troubleshooting or logging at this point? Any scenarios that you guys have run into in the wild there? All right. One other thing to show you while I'm in the administrator here. Under Tools, if I go to View License Usage, it's going to show me all the licenses that are currently bound. So currently I don't have anything connected at this point, so nothing has reached back to this database communicator. Now that could be caused by one of two things. Either nothing can reach the server here, nothing is configured, or even a third, the database communicator service has been restarted. So when you do restart the communicator, all of the licenses, all of the connections, the active connections are cleared out. Now, that is a good point when we're thinking about database migration activities. So if you do not stop that database communicator before you migrate, you may end up in a situation where the licenses table is still binding those licenses to the original communicator, which can cause you license issues in the long run. There is a way to do it. It's by contacting our support department, and they'll help to clear out that licensing table for you so that you have full access to the suite of seats that you have available. Yeah. It will also show in here all of the communicators that are connected to this particular database. So right now I only have the one database communicator from my ITS6 system here. There may be additional communicators in the environment if we have a larger environment, something that's more than about 2,000 workstations there. So you can also check the license usage for those other communicators. All right. Any questions on any of the material that we've covered today? And are there any additional concepts that anybody would like to go over? Anything you feel I've missed here? All right. Thank you guys for the quick session there. I will hang out on the line in case there are additional questions you guys want to discuss, or if you do have questions after the session here, you can go ahead and contact either myself or Rachel in the ITS department, or you can reach out to support at printaudit.com for any additional details there. Yeah, thanks for attending, and we will see you next time.